They tore down our family barn while my daughter was in chemo. I drove up thinking they'd left a note, maybe a warning, and instead there was an orange excavator, splinters like confetti, and a demolition notice stapled to a post where my front gate used to be. I remember standing there with the hospital smell still on my clothes and thinking, this is where everything went sideways. My name is Cole Davenport. My daughter is Lily, 8 years old, obsessed with purple socks and drawing suns with a million lines, and for 3 months she'd been in and out of chemo, small brave smiles between needle sticks, an atlas of stickers on her four-pole. We'd raised that barn for 3 generations. My grandfather built it with hands that never stopped. And it wasn't just wood and nails, it was where Lily learned to chase frogs, where I learned how not to crumble when things went wrong. But to Evelyn Hart, the president of the Maple Hollow Homeowners Association, it was liability, an eyesore, and according to a notarized letter she waved in a public meeting, a threat to the neighborhood's aesthetic integrity. You need to know Evelyn Hart the way you meet people in small towns: soft voice, perfect hair, the kind of smile that lives in legal documents. She liked rules like other people like coffee. She loved control like other people love their children. Her resort, the Hartview Retreat, sat 2 streets over, glass and stone, and a boat dock with a view. She called herself a steward of Maple Hollow. Steward, she said, as she filed for demolition on a Wednesday. The same week Lily had a transplant consult on Thursday. Coincidence looks different when it's convenient. I'm not a vindictive man. I don't live for headlines or revenge plots. I work with my hands. I fix things. I remember faces. But when I unearthed a rusted tin box in the barn's rubble, a lockbox wedged behind a beam with the initials TD carved into it, everything went from grief to strategy. Inside were blueprints and an old county deed, handwritten and stamped, dated 1919, a water easement that granted my family the right to operate the old valve down by the dam. It wasn't just a plot of wet dirt. It was municipal leverage, a legal key to the creek that fed Hartview's pond and, by extension, half the neighborhood's irrigation system. I didn't want war, but fairness isn't a passive thing. So I started with the paper trail: county clerk stamps, microfilm, a neighbor whose memory outlived his hearing. We photocopied the deed. We recorded conversations. We made lists of who'd benefited from Hartview's water and who'd been cut off before. Evelyn responded the way people who think they're untouchable do, with lawyers, thinly veiled threats, and a glossy pamphlet about public safety. She didn't call me by my name at the HOA meeting. She called me the property owner whose structure posed hazards, like I was an abstract noun. There's a scene I can still see in perfect bad lighting: the HOA hall, fluorescent hum, folding chairs, Evelyn at the podium with that smile, and me standing up holding copies of my grandfather's deed. I said, plain and simple, this is ours. It was signed in 1919. You can't just tear history down because it doesn't match your brochure. She laughed, not full laugh, but a quiet cut, and said, Mr. Davenport, the association acts in the interest of safety and value. Emotion doesn't override our bylaws. It was the moment I stopped being surprised by cruelty and started cataloging its methods. That night, with Lily asleep and a bruise forming under my eye from someone in the parking lot who didn't like my questions, I walked down to the dam. The valve was older than my truck, a round iron wheel the size of a dinner plate, crusted with river years. My fingers fit right into the grooves: an inheritance. Literally, you could feel generations in the metal. I turned it once, just to see, and the stream slowed, like a long exhale withheld. I didn't think of headlines. I thought of Lily's face when she'd painted a tiny boat on the pond that summer, all her crayons bleeding into the water. If you think turning a valve was mean, let me be blunt: it wasn't to hurt people, it was to make them look. The Hartview irrigation shut down by morning, sprinklers clicking to nothing, the pond's surface pulling in on itself like breath held too long. Guests called the front desk. Investors called their lawyers. Evelyn called me a saboteur on a live stream she'd set up to rally the neighborhood. I called the county clerk and asked them to come down and verify the deed that was in my back pocket. The fight didn't stay neat. Evelyn retaliated with everything modern influence can buy: insurance holdbacks for Lily's hospital, anonymous complaints about our dogs, a coordinated social media smear that painted me as a dangerous landowner. People we'd helped in winter found fences suddenly fenced tighter. Some neighbors looked away. I can't blame them. Fear is a currency. But a few stood with me. Hal from the feed store, whose wife once lost a roof to a storm and swore we were family. Maria, who runs the clinic and knows what it looks like when system and person collide. They brought witness statements. They recorded phone calls where Evelyn's attorney spoke in legalese about removal and community protection. The county hearing, that's where the movie music would start. If this were a movie, was a long, raw morning of evidence. I read aloud the deed until my throat went dry. I played recordings of phone calls where Heartview's maintenance team admitted they'd rerouted a feeder line without permits. I watched Evelyn's facade fall in inches, a small, precise crack where confidence used to be. She accused me of grandstanding. I accused her of weaponizing neighbors' lives for profit. At one point, she leaned in and said, "You don't get to make the town resentful and call it justice." And I almost laughed because the whole thing was a map of her resentments. Justice, as it turns out, is pedestrian. It's county clerks who show up. It's permits that can be traced. It's the slow, stubborn machinery of bureaucracy that likes rules the kind Evelyn thought she controlled. The county found in our favor. The deed was valid. Heartview had no unilateral right to demolish, and unauthorized tampering with water infrastructure had been documented. The investigators suggested fines, restoration, and a review of Heartview's operations. Evelyn resigned from the board the next week. It didn't look like a dramatic arrest or a movie montage of confessions. It looked like papers signed and lenders calling. But the personal cost, that's the part edits get rid of. Lily missed school and chemo appointments because of this. Insurance ping-ponged like a bad game. And there were nights I sat on the clinic steps watching mothers and fathers come and go, wondering if courage was the same as culpability. There were weeks of awkward neighbors seeing us differently. And there were quiet days when Lily would point at the window and say, "Daddy, when the sun paints the pond, did it like us better?" And how do you answer that to an 8-year-old? You take her to the clinic and you make sure the people who have power, legal, social, monetary, aren't using it like a cudgel. In the end, we rebuilt not the same barn, but a small she-shed painted lilac, where Lily could draw her sons and I could teach her how to hold a wrench without flinching. The county demanded Heartview repair the damaged feeder lines and pay for community restoration. A small trust was established to keep the water rights in the community's hands, not a single family's pockets. Evelyn moved away. Some people felt vindicated, others thought the punishment too soft. The truth about small towns is this: they are messy, and sometimes the things that feel like victory still leave a bruise. What changed most wasn't legal, it was how neighbors began to talk. People who used to whisper over fences started to knock on doors, to ask about kids and pain and the real stories behind compliance. We started a weekend market by the pond, homemade pies and secondhand tools, the kind of modest things that stitch a place back together. Lily's transplant went through, delayed and frantic, but ultimately scheduled. She drew a boat, purple sails and all, and taped it to the wall of the she shed. When she finally came home from the hospital, we watched the pond catch light, and I realized that letting water flow is also letting people see. So why tell you this? Maybe because you've got an HOA notice tucked behind a mailbox, or maybe because you've watched leaders decide what matters for reasons only they understand. Maybe because you felt small and wish someone else would read the old deed and do the right thing. I'll tell you what I learned, not the civic lesson version, but the human one. Power without accountability looks like inevitability, and inevitability gets overturned by stubbornness, by documentation, by neighbors who will put their names on a piece of paper and show up. I'm asking you, yes, you watching this in the quiet of your kitchen or on your phone on a bus, what would you have done? Was turning that valve too far? Was Evelyn right in calling it liability? Tell me where you land on fairness versus rule following, on community enforcement versus private interest. Share a time you stood up or didn't, and why.